Hello and welcome to our 7-8 minutes of weekly Torah talk. Our guest today is Rabbi Wendi Geffen of the North Shore Congregation Israel Community in Glencoe, Illinois. Hello, Rabbi. Thank you for being with us.
Thanks so much for having me.
Our Parsha this week is Chayei Sarah, the life of Sarah. This week's Torah portion features the death of Sarah. Then Abraham's servant is sent, laden with gifts, to Haran to find a wife for Yitzchak, Abraham's son. At the village well, the servant asked God for a sign. When the maidens come to the well, he will ask for some water to drink. The woman who will offer to give his camels to drink as well shall be the one destined for his master's son. Rivka, passes the test, and after some negotiation with her family, she joins the servant as he goes back to Avram's house. She then marries Yitzchak, and the Torah says he loves her. When Abraham dies, he is buried by his two sons, Yitzchak and Ishmael. The first pasuk of the parsha says, "Vayu Chayei Sarah 100 shana ve-20 shana ve-7 shanim shne Chayei Sarah." And the life of Sarah was 100 years and 20 years and 7 years. These were the years of the life of Sarah. So, Rabbi, this week's Parsha is about the chain of generations, right? We move from Abraham to Yitzchak, or to Yitzchak and Ishmael, and then later in the story we will turn to Yaakov. But Rivka's role is really significant in this Parsha.
Absolutely. It's, we say always in our tradition, this line of the patriarchs, which is an important line, Abraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov. But Yitzchak is interesting in that of the patriarchs, he's often referred to sort of as the bridge. He doesn't get a lot of airtime as an active participant. He's largely passive, tends to be quiet. The implications in the Midrash about him are, he perhaps he's a little damaged after the Akedah incident, which one could certainly understand
right.
a certain family trauma experience and surviving that and what that might mean. And if anything, he's passive in that Abraham sends a servant to go find a wife for Isaac, which says a lot about Abraham. He mourns Sarah and then immediately turns to planning for the future, this continuity of the covenant and this promise. And the servant goes and happens upon Rivka, who in many ways is so much more active than Yitzchak, just in the very first part in which we're introduced to her. Rivka, of course, is the one to later, not in this parsha, but later,
to do all of the things
orient everything, manipulate everything, create more family trauma, arguably, in monkeying with which son is going to sort of get the focus, in this case, continue the promise,
right.
With Jacob. And we can argue a lot about that end. Is she justified? Is she not? Was she really the one fulfilling the covenant, or not? But at least in our parsha, some of the most, I think, interesting things are the subtle hints about parallels, not between Isaac and his father, but Rivka and Abraham.
So
and they're little.
Even though the Torah tells us towards the end of the parsha that Rivka feels a void that Sarah left behind, and that's why Yitzchak loves her, you argue that she's more like Abraham than she's like Sarah.
Absolutely. I mean, which is, I don't know whether the text is trying to offer us a subversive message in this respect or not. But if you look, there are certain literary parallels between Abraham and Rivka, which are really missing between Abraham and Yitzchak. So, for example, Abraham is always associated with chesed, with kindness, and a lot of that backs up to his experience with the three men who appear at his tent.
Right, accepting the guests and feeding them and all that.
Exactly, and the words that are used in that parsha to describe Abraham's actions are the exact same words that are used to describe Rivka's actions upon going out and encountering the servant. So, for example, both Abraham and Rivka hurry. That word hurry is used. Right. Both of them run. Both of them tend to human needs and animal needs. Instinctively, immediately. And so there's this kind of immediate notion of the paralleling between the two in terms of their hospitality, certainly.
Do you see any significance to the fact that Abraham does it within his own home or tent, and Rivka is doing this as she goes out to the well?
I mean, and I would argue it ups the ante, like Kal V'chomer.
Like she's even more active.
Exactly, and she is fulfilling this perpetuation of what does it mean to be part of a line that is noted for those who will be blessed are associated with them, and those who will be cursed will not be associated with them. It's a sort of exponential virtuous cycle almost, but she is the one to enact it, and really not Yitzchak. The text goes farther. So, of course, there's these parallels between kind of hospitality and chesed, but also the notion that both Avraham and Rivka are people who leave the familiar willingly. That word lech or elech is used in both. God says, of course, to Avram, lech lecha. Right. And when this sort of negotiation is going down between Rivka's family and Abraham's servants about the marriage, they kind of come to a little bit of an impasse, and they say, well, let's go consult with Rivka. She needs to give her permission. And all she says is one word, elech. Right. I'll go. Right. Which is this stunning kind of parallel that I think isn't just coincidence. And then, even the more so, the blessing that's given to Abraham after the Akedah, which speaks about him being blessed, his generations growing into greatness as the stars in the sky, the sands in the sea, and then his descendants ultimately defeating their foes, meeting them at the gate, essentially, that language of Shar Oivav. The blessing that's given to Rivka by her family before she departs is nearly the exact same blessing. Be multiple, go out, and your descendants will meet their enemies at the gates. It's the only difference in the language is it doesn't use oivav, it uses sonav. But
so it's hers more than Yitzchak's.
Yeah, absolutely. And she, then when you put it in the line of continuity, if we had left it up to Yitzchak and she hadn't been there, Esav is the next one in line. Right. Yaakov would have never made it into the storyline. In the same way, she is the one who, for good or for bad, manipulates the scenario to make the line fall that way.
So I'll ask you a question with somewhat of a contemporary flavor.
Yeah.
Does the character of Rivka, is it empowering for women, or is it more, or is she the conniving woman that you don't want to be associated with?
Can I answer yes?
Yeah, to both.
So yes, I think there's truth in both, and obviously, so if we put it back in its context, right? So to play it out like this happened back when it did, we can derive a few conclusions. Rivka is clearly committed. She does within her role. She never, interestingly enough, steps necessarily so outside of her prescribed societal role. Right. She is the wife. She comforts her husband after his mother is gone and dead. She yields children. She raises them, and she's involved in their lives. She favors one over the other for whatever reasons it is, and that's sort of left up to Midrash and kind of opinion about is her favoring or her kind of focus on one over the other justified or not? But she sees something that she believes is right, and she's willing to step up to it. She's willing to make change and not just accept the prescribed will of her husband. So in that respect, and I don't know if it's a fair game to play between, 4,000 years ago or more and now today.
Yeah, well, that's why I said it's a contemporary question about an ancient character, but
exactly. But sort of if there were like a pottery ceiling back then, or some whatever the appropriate metaphor would be, maybe she would have been one of the early pioneers. She certainly gets more descriptive focus in Torah than Sarah. We know very little about Sarah, and only in reference to her essential loyalty to her husband, and kind of, not that there's anything wrong with it, but she follows along for better or for worse.
Right.
We hear little about her own individuated choices, their implications or ramifications over the arc of her life. Whereas with Rivka, from the get-go, the very first introduction we have to her is she goes out. She is, her parents don't say, go help out this servant by the well. She's there. He encounters her, and she says, let me give you some water. And then she says, hey, I'm going to help out your camels, which wasn't like just filling up a bottle. It was a massive amount of water that would have been required to satiate these camels. Right. Gallons and gallons and gallons. And she does it all. I mean, she's tough. She's no sort of flower of the desert, And I don't know. I think, like, could we call her an early biblical feminist role model? I don't know that I'd make that a bumper sticker, but I think that we're getting a hint of a message, at least if it's not explicit on the surface, it's just under the surface, that even if at the end of the day she manipulates a scenario, and that is sort of a moral question of is it justifiable or not, right. Even if it's for the will of God, the beginning in particular in this parsha and the similarities between Rivka and Abraham, I think it's the text saying to us, hey, she is the bridge generation. Isaac may get the sort of nameplate, but you can't forget about Rivka. It wouldn't have happened without her.
Right. I think, even though you didn't specifically say it, I think I know. I can give the answer of whether she empowers you or frightens you. Rabbi, thank you so much, and Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom. Thank you so much.